All right, everybody. I'm going to go ahead. I think hopefully everybody that's going to be joining us has joined us at this point. So I'm going to try to go ahead and get started. So thank you for joining us today. My name is Mark Krause. I'm an estate planning attorney with Copenbarger Copenbarger, and I'm here to talk about protecting your digital legacy. As a lawyerly caveat that I do have to make, this information, as you can see from this slide, is provided for educational purposes only. This is not intended to actually be legal advice, specific legal advice. I would love to give you some specific legal advice about this, but that's going to require us to actually schedule an appointment so that we can deal with your concerns one-on-one directly. But this information is intended to be educational. As many of you might know, other than some other estate planning firms where you might have maybe one or two people and essentially encompassing the entire firms, we have several full-time attorneys across multiple departments, including our estate planning department, a full-time estate administration department, a litigation department, and even a tax and business department. We also have a large, wonderful staff that helps us attorneys look good every day. And we have several locations across California for your convenience, both in Northern California all the way up to Santa Cruz and San Jose, and in Southern California all the way from Pasadena down to San Diego. So that said, what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about digital matters in general. We're going to talk about how to do some digital estate planning, and I'm going to try to hopefully give you some pithy key takeaways that'll help you in trying to engage in your own digital planning and how to start unraveling some of these complex issues. So first, trying to understand the basics of digital matters. Obviously, the world has kind of gone digital. That is something that has happened probably in most of your lifetimes. I know even for myself, the internet wasn't really a thing when I was a small child, and I got to go from the internet being, the clunky dial-up in the late 90s to all the rise of social media and everything now. So it's been a whirlwind of technological change sort of very quickly. As Plato has noted, the Greek philosopher, technology, if you ever read the Phaedo, I don't know how many people have, or I guess this would actually be the Phaedrus. Technology can be a double-edged sword. While it can make certain things very helpful, it can also have its drawbacks. He noted it in the context of writing. While writing certainly expanded our ability to remember things by being able to write them down, it also hurt our ability to remember things because the sort of oral remembrance culture essentially was killed as soon as people started writing things down. We sort of externalized powers that we previously had, and that's a lot of the way it is with the rise of digital assets and making everything digital. It has definitely externalized and increased our ability to sort of maintain and store a lot of things, but it also has its drawbacks. Digital assets encompass not just, monetary things of monetary value, but also things of emotional value. Often, if you are familiar with things like Legacy Box and a lot of these kinds of services, people are more and more storing these important memories, whether they're videos, pictures, not just in physical means like those big photo albums that my mom has about 20 or so of on her bookshelves, but now people are digitizing those and instead of the old film reels and VHS tapes, people are storing those family movies in a digital context now, in a digital means. Something to worry about. These, while this does augment our ability and make it more convenient to store much more data, there's an increasing risk that when we want people to be able to access them in the future, that they could be locked out of important accounts of all sorts of kinds. Digital concerns are often overlooked in traditional estate planning. If you have an estate plan that was done, in the year 2000 or even earlier, and if you haven't really revisited those issues, your plan probably is not really equipped to deal with these kinds of concerns, and your documents don't have provisions in them which could help you deal with this digital planning. Protecting these assets ensures that your legacy will continue and that you have control over all these important things that we've digitized in the future. So what kinds of things are we talking about? We're talking about all sorts of online financial accounts, whether that be payment things like PayPal, or whether we're talking about, Robinhood. A lot of people have various online investing platforms. A really important issue to be aware of is cryptocurrency and digital wallets. All these sorts of emerging things, especially in the world of crypto, are really people really tend not know to have thought very carefully about them and how to deal with them with estate planning. And a lot of the laws on these things are emerging. So it's something to really that requires more thought than people have usually given it. And the propensity to be locked out of certain, important crypto accounts or crypto wallets can be a really, really concerning thing, because if you essentially don't have access, if you haven't ensured properly that people have access in the future, then the nice thing about how secure crypto is they can be locked out forever. So it's a really important thing to think about ahead of time. Online businesses, websites, especially if you're primarily operating through e-commerce platforms, your personal, sort of social media, and just general, storage of all your digitized, photos, any sort of writings you may have done, and anything else that you keep, in some place like, a Dropbox or an iCloud or anything like that. This can also include intellectual property that's primarily of a digital nature. So how do you secure access? Something to think about. One, keep an updated inventory of the important digital assets you have and where they're stored and how to get at them. It can be really complicated. There can be a complicated array of these things, long lists. So the more you can keep a sort of updated list of everything, so that A, you can keep it straight, and B, that you can help someone else, whoever is going to be managing your estate after you, keep it straight. It's very important to keep an updated inventory of all these things. Passwords can be the kind of things, again, a double-edged sword. By requiring passwords, we increase security, but sometimes we can increase security to the point where it locks us out. I'm sure a lot of you have experienced forgetting passwords from time to time. And as we keep a more complex array of digital accounts and assets, and as we're trying to be careful, hopefully not using the same password for every single one of these accounts, it can be important to create and use password managers. There's multiple kinds of password managers. There's the kind that just essentially stays within your own device, on your computer or your tablet. There can be, or an external hard drive. There can be the kind that we just use sometimes by default through Google itself, or Safari or one of these other browsers. They can have their own password managers. And then there's password managers that are stored on a cloud that you essentially likely have to pay for, things like Bitwarden, 1Password, NerdPass are just some examples of some of these, other sort of cloud-based ones that typically you're going to have to pay for. There are drawbacks to each of these options of using password managers. Obviously, using simply the password managers that are going to be on your online browsers, your internet browsers are probably going to be less secure, a little less sophisticated than some of the other ones, but those tend to be free. Using the ones that are specific to your device can be really secure, at least from an online standpoint, but also they can be easier to lose, especially if you lose your device is stolen. So there's a cost benefit to all these things that one has to think about. It's important often to appoint a trusted person to access accounts when needed, and that can be done through a variety of ways that we're going to kind of get into a little more detail on. Leave clear instructions about access. That goes along with keeping an updated inventory. It's really important that there is a list of these assets and instructions for anybody that you're going to need to handle them after you either become incapacitated or you pass away. They're going to need clear instructions as to how to access all these, because it's not necessarily going to be the same for every kind of digital asset or every kind of digital account. And regularly update your credentials. Regularly make sure that if there is some type of contact, legacy contact, or inactivity legacy contact or something like that on those accounts, that you keep it updated just like you do your estate planning documents. Sometimes who we want to be our successor trustee / executor changes. So you need, similarly, when you're setting something up directly with, one of these online platforms, make sure that your decision makers, to the extent you can appoint them, are updated. and make sure that those password lists and those instructions and the overall inventory are updated regularly. So there's various kinds of legal challenges that come with trying to manage your digital estate and all your digital assets. Platforms can be very restrictive about account transfers after death. Many types of digital accounts don't allow for you to simply appoint a beneficiary that automatically gets access to the account after you die. There are some, and even when they have the ability to sort of nominate somebody to take care of things after you, there can still be restrictions even within that. For instance, you can nominate a legacy contact through Facebook, but the legacy contact is not going to be able to access necessarily everything in that Facebook account. They're going to be able to post messages to let everybody know essentially that the person is that you have passed, and to update certain other kinds of information, but they're not necessarily going to be able to access automatically your private messages or things like that. So it's going to be a little different depending on which, whether you're talking about Google, Facebook, Apple, they all have sort of different policies. And so it's important to familiarize yourselves with those things. There's also privacy laws that can prevent people, a whole inner sort of connecting web of different laws that can prevent you to access things without legal authority. And in general, a lot of these companies, the general rule is going to be that they're going to say no unless you give them sufficient reason, like a court order or an estate planning document that gives them a reason to say yes, because they don't want to run afoul of all these various sorts of privacy laws, because that can be very costly. Password protection encryption can, as I said, create access barriers, because the more passwords you have, the tougher they are to remember. The more you have to update them, the tougher they are to remember, which is why, and all sorts of encryption can make it, everything that can protect your assets can also make it more difficult to access them. And that's, like I said, why a password manager and a strategy for dealing with these things is really important. Terms of service agreements are often going to override, in general, anybody's in particular family wishes. You can want what you want, but if the terms of service of Google or Facebook or Instagram or any of these other, platforms, the terms of service are going to be followed pretty strictly unless there's a good reason, unless there's something overriding them, like an estate planning document. Again, estate planning documents must address digital access rights. If you have an estate plan that was done 20 years ago, it's likely that they're not going to have any provisions that deal with digital assets. Here at Copenbarger, if you've done, by contrast, if you've done estate planning in the last couple of years, you're likely going to be able to go in to your trust, the certificate of trust that shows the trustee's powers, which are also in the trust itself, and the durable power of attorney are all going to have specific kind of bulky paragraphs, because they're meant to cover a variety of situations which do exist. And we also try to give a lot of leeway to cover, anything that might emerge technological wise after the fact, so that we can cover as broad a scope of things as we can. But big sort of large detailed paragraphs that give your decision makers authority to manage your digital assets on your behalf. So how do we do digital estate planning? One thing I should say too, just in case you want to maybe be a little more aware and have a little more avenue for looking into this in the future, there is a specific law that governs a lot of these things. It's a very clunky worded law, so it's the Revised Uniform Fiduciary Access to Digital Assets Act. And if that sounds like a mouthful, it is, because even the little acronym that goes with it is quite long. It's the RUFADAA, Revised Uniform Fiduciary Access to Digital Assets Act. It provides the basic legal framework for a lot of how these accounts can be interfaced with and accessed after somebody passes away or becomes incapacitated. I will say that sort of general rules on this, the real general framework, is that the first thing that's going to control is online tools. And those are not always going to be with, depending on which company you're dealing with, they're not always going to be available. But for things like Google, Apple, Verizon, there's different kinds of legacy or inactivity contacts that you're going to be able to set up, and those will control essentially over everything else. So you're going to want to, when you're trying to figure this out, depending on which company you're going to have to interface with, make sure you know if they have any digital tools available and make use of those, because those are going to legally control, first of all. The next thing that's going to control is something we're going to talk about, pretty much immediately right now, is legal documents, your estate planning documents, wills, trusts, durable powers of attorneys, and unfortunately, if necessary, probate court orders are sometimes required if you haven't done the requisite planning and you don't have the required documents. And lastly, are going to essentially be terms of service agreements. So if you haven't done the relevant planning and you haven't set up any online tools, you're stuck with whatever those terms of service agreements are, and they might not be such that they're cohesive with what you want your plan to be or consistent with what you want your plan to be. So again, first thing, add digital asset clauses to your documents. If you haven't had those documents updated in quite a while, definitely come see us and we can talk about how to update everything to make sure that your durable power of attorney and your trust provides for people to be able, whoever you want your decision makers to be able to manage and access all your digital assets and accounts, both while you're incapacitated and after you pass away. It's important to leave instructions for handling crypto and digital wallets. This is especially important in the context of crypto, because while sometimes you might have a specific, crypto platform that you choose to invest with, like Coinbase or Binance, oftentimes you might just not have a platform, and it might just be a direct transaction. You might have something on a flash drive or somewhere else, which is just one password or one key protected. And if you don't leave instructions, if there's no trail to figure out what your password or what the key is for accessing these things in the future, then you might have an awful lot of money that no one's ever going to be able to access. I know many people have heard horror stories of people putting crypto of various kinds on, say, flash drives, then accidentally throwing them away. And in those cases, it's essentially like it's the most expensive flash drive that anyone has ever had. It becomes completely useless and no one can ever do anything with it. And there's no real good way to access crypto unless you've set things up for your successor trustee or whoever you want to be your decision maker to access things after the fact. So it's really important to leave instructions for how to access and handle crypto. Coinbase and Binance, if you have one of these digital platforms, you need to look into whether or not you can set up a legacy contact and what those rules are. I believe that Coinbase doesn't have any option to set any sort of beneficiary or legacy contact, but Binance might have, I believe, have that ability. So that's something you definitely want to look into. If, say, you have your whole crypto on a particular flash drive, which is sort of in one sense, the most secure, but in another sense, hardest to access later, that's something that you probably want to make sure, for just as by way of example, that you keep that flash drive in a very safe place, like a safe deposit box. And you probably want to make sure that you leave written instructions that your successor trustee or whoever is going to be making your decisions for you is going to be able to find, and that password or that key is going to be available for them to find, and that they know where it is, that you leave instructions as to where these assets are stored. So you're going to want to include succession plans for online businesses or websites that not only account for the traditional, sort of business succession plans, but also that are integrated with, to whatever degree this business is online or requires access to online platforms. And you want to keep the digital plan updated as technology evolves. That's why our digital sort of clauses cover not only everything we know about right now, but specifically make reference to technology that may emerge in the future. You're going to want to keep your eye on the pulse on this, because things just keep evolving and they're not going to get any simpler. So make sure that your plan evolves as the sophistication and variety of your technological assets and digital assets evolves. Protecting your digital assets, you want to back up family photos and videos regularly. And again, there's many ways to store these things. If you haven't digitized any of these things, there are things like I mentioned earlier, and I have no financial relationship with any of these companies that I'm mentioning today, so they're just brought forth by way of example. But something like Legacy Box or iMemories or EverPresent are services that you can use to digitize a lot of these things, whether they're pictures or home movies or things like this. But then you essentially have to store them on some kind of digital platform. That could just be a storage device like an external hard drive or a flash drive, or that could be something like iCloud or Dropbox or, any of the other sort of online storage options. And you're going to have to make sure that all these things are backed up regularly and that you know where everything is and how to get to it. Make sure that where you're storing them is secure. Make sure that whoever needs to be able to access them knows how to access them and has the ability to do so. You might want to consider for certain platforms that involve things like emails and private messages. Like I mentioned, Facebook, a legacy contact can be appointed, but they have no ability to access private messages. So if there's anything important that you're worried about being locked out of, even if you're able to appoint some kind of legacy or inactivity contact, then you're going to want to make sure maybe to archive some of these things. If they're really important things stored in emails or direct messages, you might want to figure out how to archive them or store them in some other way than just leaving them on that platform alone. Because even with this digital estate planning, some of these things may not be accessible still. You're going to, in general, just use basic estate planning tools to pass down your digital heirlooms. So make sure that digital assets are included in your distribution provisions if they need to be. If you want certain digital assets to go somewhere specific, then you need to spell that out in your estate plan, in your trust. And I will say here, as a general matter, when we're talking about digital estate planning tools, obviously there's wills and trusts. Obviously, if you've been at any of our seminars before, we're going to talk about the advantages of having a trust, not just a will. And in this case, one major thing to remember, one major thing I want you to understand is that wills, as we've mentioned many times before, have to go through probate court. If you want to, you generally have to probate a will. And so anything you spell out specifically in your will is going to essentially become likely going to become a matter of public record. So the degree to which you want to try to conceal maybe or keep private some of these digital assets and how to access them and who gets the right to access them, to the degree you want to keep it private and not have it a matter of public record, you're definitely going to want to choose to prepare a trust, not just a will. So that's something I want people to definitely consider and keep in mind. Another important aspect of using traditional estate planning tools, and it's tied in also with that inventory idea, is if you have a trust, you know that there are schedules of assets in the back of your trust. Digital assets that are assets. You're going to want to, especially crypto, you're going to want to make sure that crypto and things like that are referenced in your schedules and that those schedules are up to date. Ensuring accessibility. Again, this is sort of an ongoing theme, but you're going to want to keep a careful inventory. Make sure that you have a plan for how the people after you're going to be able to access everything. Make sure that if you have a password manager, that they have either the master password stored somewhere or the ability to access it. You're going to want to make sure that they have the ability to access crypto and any sort of means that you have it stored in, especially important. You need to document how you want each asset to be handled after your passing, and make sure that your digital asset planning is just integrated as a whole with all your other asset planning. Make sure any specific gifts of digital assets are referenced specifically in your trust, and make sure that your plan is up to date, both in terms of listing the schedules, in terms of who your decision makers are, in terms of what specific gifts of digital assets you might want to give. And an important general thing here to remember too, that is something we kind of forget as an estate planning tool, because it's not technically a legal document, but letters of instruction are something that can be very versatile, that you can include in your sort of binder as a part of your general estate planning. Letters of instruction are very versatile tools, and in this case you can provide a lot of instructions about digital assets, how to access them. It's a really good idea to make sure that if you have letters of instruction, that they're updated to incorporate and include all the information about the inventory of digital assets, how to access them, important passwords and things like that. So key takeaways. Again, digital assets are extremely important. It's not just, a sort of minor concern anymore. A lot of times, a lot of our most important things, whether that be important in a monetary sense or important in an emotional sense, are stored in digital means. Having a clear inventory is crucial for you to have a plan that's going to actually be able to work and be implemented. And you need to be aware of the legal challenges that can make this kind of planning difficult. Again, just to give you rehash the basic framework, it's going to be governed by the revised Uniform Fiduciary Access to Digital Assets Act, which again is the RUFADAA. Again, doesn't that roll off the tongue? So you're going to want to be aware of that. The general framework it sets up is that online tools, to the degree that they're available, are going to control first, sort of your first line of defense that's going to tend to control over everything else. And that's going to be usually legacy contacts or inactivity contacts. And just to explain a little bit of the difference there, inactivity for certain things like Google, and I know Verizon and all Verizon's sort of children companies, of which you should be aware Yahoo is one if you have a Yahoo email. The way they sort of determine this is not so much by becoming informed that somebody's passed away or specifically becoming informed that somebody's incapacitated. They just have periods of inactivity on an account, which will trigger that account either being locked up and or deleted. And so for some of these companies, you can set up an inactivity sort of contact that's kind of the equivalent of a legacy contact. So that's something to be aware of. But to the degree that any of these online platforms or sort of companies gives you the ability to set up online tools to appoint somebody to be able to manage things during your incapacity or at your death, you're definitely going to want to take advantage of those, because those are going to be the sort of first line of defense that controls over pretty much everything else. The second line of defense is what we can primarily help you with, which is estate planning documents. In the absence of online tools, or if nobody's utilized the online tools, typically the next best thing is to have a trust or a durable power of attorney that's going to specifically appoint somebody and within the four corners of that document specifically empower them to manage digital assets on your behalf. If you haven't done the requisite estate planning, or even if all you have is a will, you might have to get a court order in order to actually have somebody manage those digital assets, which is going to require you spending money going through probate. And then sort of the lowest level is the terms of service. If you haven't done any planning, you haven't used any digital tool, online tools that are available, whatever those terms of service happen to be, that's going to be what controls. And there's not really any way other than getting a court order to sort of deal with that. So I want you to be aware of that legal framework. Make sure to include provisions for digital property in your trust. Make sure that whatever digital memories you want to protect, if you've gone to the trouble to digitize, all these photo albums and videos, you got to also go through the trouble of making sure that the people you want to access them in the future can actually access them. It does no good to have a digital photo album if no one knows about it and no one is able to access it later. And make sure, again, that you just make regular updates to all these sort of moving parts to make sure that the digital aspect of your estate stays secure and is going to go where you want it to go when you become incapacitated or pass away. So I'm sure there are a lot of questions. In conclusion, how we can help. Obviously, all this is really general advice, like I said, and what we're here to do is help deal with the one-on-one, help you figure out how we can tailor an estate plan to your specific needs and what your specific assets are and where you want your stuff to go, and to be able to give you advice person to person, to be able to bounce things off of and help you come up with, because sometimes it requires a sounding board to even fully figure out and flesh out what you want to happen in the future. And we're here for that. So if you haven't reviewed your estate plan with us in the last 3 to 5 years, or especially if it's even been longer, if there's been any marriage divorce issues, any important changes in what property you have, and certainly what digital assets you might have or not have anymore. If you've received an inheritance from a parent or a grandparent or somebody, if you've had any children, if there's been any changes, especially one thing that happens a lot of times is our decision makers, if they're older, might pass away, or sometimes unfortunately even the relationships deteriorate. Any of these changes are times where we really want you to come in and have a discussion with us so we can make sure that your estate plan is exactly how you want it to be and that it's equipped to deal with your needs. Obviously, this is self-serving, but we would really like for you to work with Copenbarger, and we think there's good reason to do so. We've not just opened yesterday, and we're not planning on going anywhere anytime soon. We're not just dependent on one person We're a firm that's planning on being here just as long as we've been here. So we have 10 full-time attorneys, one attorney of counsel. We have lots and lots of experience. We have attorneys with advanced degrees and specialization in estate planning and tax and other things. We have a large, diverse, really wonderful staff and a lot of locations. So we feel equipped to serve your needs both now and for the long haul. And one thing you should also be aware of is that by doing this webinar, you have the ability to schedule a free appointment with us. So if you have any concerns that are not able to just be addressed by watching this webinar or even by the questions that I'm going to answer in a couple of minutes, please come see us so we can really have an in-depth conversation and really make sure that your estate plan reflects your wishes and is able to do functionally what you want it to do. I really appreciate everybody's time and you're joining us today. We have our contact information up in this last slide. And one thing I definitely want to highlight is the digital evaluation link. Please check out the link in the chat and please give us your feedback. We really do review it and we really do value your feedback. And we want to ultimately make sure that these webinars and everything we do is serving our clients. And the way that we're ensure that we're able to do that is by you giving us that feedback. So I'd really appreciate it if you take the time after this to do that. And again, I appreciate all your time and attention. And I believe now I'm going to turn it over to see if there's any Q&A. I'm going to check the Q&A first. And if there's anything straggling around in the chat as well, I will definitely check that after. It doesn't look as if any other questions are coming through right now. But I will say once again, thank you very much for your time and attention today, everybody that attended. We will be available if you want to utilize your ability to schedule a free appointment with us, and we can really deal with your specific needs on a one-on-one, specifically tailored basis. And please, if you haven't already done so, please fill out that digital evaluation that's going to be in the chat. I would really appreciate your feedback. And once again, my name is Mark Krause in the estate planning department with Copenbarger. And I really appreciate all your time and attention and giving us the ability to serve you.